there is a move, and I would be fine with it for Jack Smith. Obviously, President Trump said he'd be fired within the first 2 seconds he's in office. So instead of that, Jack Smith now will be winding down, likely, both of the cases against President Trump that he still has pending. So, of course, he's got the classified documents case out of Florida, but right now that's pending just on whether or not he can have jurisdiction. The other case, of course, involves January 6th. That's in D.C. It's not even supposed to have a hearing until March, so can't move forward with that. That is again, that's more than just Justice Department thinking. You can't continue with a criminal prosecution of a sitting president of the United States. So Jack Smith knew the election outcome would have huge impacts on his ability to move forward, but let's remember why it took them so long. The Supreme Court said what they were trying to file was unconstitutional initially out of those January 6 cases, that basically the president, in this idea of when is the president not the president while they're in office, and what's presidential acts and what aren't presidential acts. Those are questions that were going to have to be decided, that now it doesn't appear we will, and it probably doesn't have to be in the future either if we can get rid of lawfare.
The 2 quintessential cases that are before us today involve Jack Smith, who basically has sought to bring a charge, number one, claiming that Donald Trump has violated essentially the federal laws governing the handling of documents. That's in Florida, and then has engaged in election interference in violation of the law, and he's brought that particular case in Washington, D.C., before Judge Chutkan. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the Justice Department policy prevents the Justice Department from essentially attempting to imprison or bring charges against a sitting U.S. president. Neither case that is pending, in other words, the 2 cases brought by Jack Smith, are likely to be ready for trial before sometime next year at the earliest. So more likely than not, those 2 cases will be wound down. So if you look at this, we basically have had a kaleidoscope of cases brought against Trump, and they were all designed to do what? To prevent him from running from office. Meanwhile, bringing all of these legal cases has backfired. It has made Donald Trump stronger, and hence he won an overwhelming victory a few days ago.
Yeah, so, Will, on Tuesday, Judge Merchan has set a date. Really, this is for him to decide whether or not the conviction should be tossed at this point.
Right.
And there's a lot of discussion that he may dismiss the felony counts. So that whole idea that he's a convicted felon of 34 counts, that goes out the window. Those were controversial to begin with because of the issues we just talked about with Harry. And again, I don't think we have to get bogged down in this. If this moves the way it is looking like it will move, that maybe he tries to keep the misdemeanors. Of course, you can appeal those, and President Trump's team can appeal those, but that doesn't really put any kind of delay or harm on the president from being able to move forward with the transition and his administration. It also would, all of these moves really pull a plug, Harry, on the kind of any attempts by congressional Democrats to say, well, he's a convicted felon, and thus, under some 14th Amendment issue, because we're not even going to get to those cases. So on insurrection, all of that, first of all, Jack Smith really didn't bring those charges technically. But second, the idea that there's even felony counts out that may be done as well, which should make the transition for President Trump a little bit easier when they are certifying the election on Capitol Hill.
Keep in mind that Jeremy Raskin, a representative from Maryland who has threatened to bring charges within the meaning of the 14th Amendment, thus disqualifying President Trump from taking office, he may be bereft of any power to do so, number one, because more likely than not, the Republicans will retain control of the House of Representatives. But number two, there will be no basis within the meaning of the 14th Amendment to deprive President Trump of the opportunity to take office either. So I think at the end of the day, the 14th Amendment disqualification claims should likely disappear, but we should never underestimate the willingness of Democrats to try to stretch the law, to try to stretch the Constitution, to go after President Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think you're going to see action, obviously, on the federal side. What's interesting, too, Will, is that you've got, of course, Tuesday, we filed in cases at the 11th Circuit, the one to question whether or not the special counsel should even be constitutional. I don't think we're going to get a final decision on that now, but we filed, and we would be ready to fight that battle in the future if that is tried to be utilized and weaponized again against President Trump, who ultimately has the authority to fire those special counsels, and said, you know what, to Jack Smith, and made it clear he's going to be fired one way or another. Those cases are not going to be moving forward. And I think Jack Smith hopefully will do the right thing, not even put the new president into that position, and knows that under the policies you got to withdraw. And then out of New York, I mean, Letitia James is talking tough, but those are civil cases. I mean, so
right.
Yes, it's a big bond that President Trump had to put up, but ultimately, again, they really have little impact on running the country or this whole idea that he's a felon. That I think those are going to get tossed aside hopefully next week. And the other charges there on the misdemeanor counts probably can be appealed because those are very weak. And then you look at the felony counts. I think Letitia James can say whatever she wants about being tough on Donald Trump, and they're going to still be this somehow basically keep suing him in state court for civil issues, I guess, that, again, as we've seen from President Trump, he's somebody that's not going to be distracted by that.
And people also shouldn't forget the RICO case in Georgia, where Fani Willis was not taken off of it. But there will be there was oral argument in the appeals court in Georgia whether or not to keep her on, and we should expect a ruling by them sometime early next year. I have a feeling, especially with the political temperature, that they will dismiss her from the case, which that case will go away as well. But one more thing about Jack Smith before we move on in the next segment is that case down in Florida, the one that we just filed in, that's one I think the Department of Justice doesn't have to get out of to some degree, but really wants to, because it's already been tossed, the case against Trump. Right. What they're appealing is whether or not that Jack Smith, a special counsel, could stay on. Since it's only a lower court ruling in one district in the United States, I think the DOJ, for policy purposes, would rather get out of that as soon as possible so that they don't have now an appeals court ruling potentially saying that special counsels are unconstitutional. I think that they want to try to preserve that power, and they're in kind of a tricky spot right now.
What we're hearing from all reports is that Jack Smith is going to be, in some sense, either withdrawing his team, and then the Department of Justice would withdraw the charges, and that would involve Washington, D.C. and the charges that pending, coming out January 6th, but also the classified documents case, and it would put an end to the case over whether or not his position was constitutional or not, which means the next time around a special counsel gets appointed, they could probably still do their work. They'd be in the one jurisdiction may have an issue, so but it wouldn't be final that that's unconstitutional, even though we do believe it is when you look at the situation that there's no law, there's no money behind it. I mean, the list goes on and on.